In the language, you have sounds that are produced in a place of articulation, and every place of articulation requires the cooperation of two articulators, one of them being passive, the other being active. So two articulators come together in a place of articulation in a particular manner of articulation, and they turn air into sound. Sounds may, however, be produced by engaging two points of articulation, in which case it will be called co-articulation. So it means that there can be more than two articulators involved in two places of articulation. So in this case, there are two scenarios. Scenario one is called secondary articulation, which we covered in the previous video. The second scenario, which we're covering today, is called double articulation. So if both places of articulation contribute equally to the identity of the sound, that would be called double articulation or coordinate co-articulation, which we're covering today. But if one point is dominant, one point of articulation, and the other is less involved, less stricture, that would be called secondary co-articulation or secondary articulation that we covered in the previous video. Before I cover double articulation in this video, I should make a clarification. In linguistic literature, the word double articulation, the phrase double articulation, may have a different meaning. That meaning is associated with the French linguist André Martinet. He basically refers to the two levels of a structure in which language is organized. He says that speech can be analyzed into the meaningful forms of language, that is morphemes and words, etc. And this constitutes a first articulation. These units are then capable of being further analyzed into the meaningless sound units of language, for example, phonemes, which constitutes a second articulation. In this sense, if you want to be clear, you can use a different phrase, which is called duality of structure. So you don't have to use double articulation in the way that André Martinet used. Having made this clear, now we can actually cover what double articulation is. So I already mentioned that in double articulation, there are two places of articulation involved, and we know that in every place of articulation there are two articulators involved, so there will be four articulators involved. At least two places of articulation. That's called double articulation. In double articulation, one doubly articulates two consonants simultaneously with two primary places of articulation. These consonants are also articulated with the same manner of articulation, for example, two plosives or two nasals. In English, for example, you can have the ST consonant, like in the word stop. In some languages, you can have kappa as a consonant cluster. In this doubly articulated consonant cluster, k and p are both plosives in terms of manner of articulation, with p being bilabial and k being velar in terms of place of articulation. This is a basic example of doubly articulated consonants. So now you have some primary image. But now you might ask, why is it that languages use double articulation? With double articulation, you can create consonant clusters, you can create more consonantal contrast in language. Basically, you can make more words, you have more material to work with in language. Is there any doubly articulated consonant in English? Yes. In English, there is a sound W, and I want you to open your IPA chart. Oh, by the way, somebody asked me, how can I download the IPA chart? You just go online and just type IPA chart. You can get this PDF for free. If you look at this PDF, in the consonant chart, you cannot find the sound W, the sound W. But if you go down here under other symbols, you will see that the sound W is here, and it's listed here as a voiced labial-velar approximant. It doesn't say labio-velar, it says labial-velar. It means it's both labial and velar. It's referring to two different places of articulation. This clarifies that even though you have more than one place of articulation, you're not necessarily producing more than one consonant. So if you speak a language in which the sound wa does not exist, to articulate wa, one needs to engage both lips for the labial part while also engaging the back of the tongue and the velum for the velar part. Both strictures involve wide approximation. So this is a manner of articulation. They approach each other, they don't come into contact. Since the two parallel gestures are equal in stricture, the amount of a stricture in both places of articulation is the same. That is actually the distinguishing feature of double articulation compared to secondary articulation. In secondary articulation, the secondary place of articulation requires less stricture. Stricture is how much the two articulators touch each other. For example, when you have the plosive pa, the stricture happens between the two lips. But when you have this plosive ka, the stricture happens between the back of the tongue and the velum. Now that we mentioned this, maybe I can go back to that example, which comes from the African language of Igbo, where there's two sounds, the gaba. So in this language, you see I have put that tie bar on top of gaba. It means they come as a cluster together. They are doubly articulated. So it's like gba or kpa. So if you're their voice, they're gaba. If they're not voiced, they're kpa. So in both kpa and gaba, the velar and labial closures are made and released simultaneously.